One day, a man with a suitcase and a violin case arrives at the station and finds the location of a bomb. He opens his suitcase, which turns out to be a device capable of neutralizing the power of an explosion, and removes the explosive device from the bomb. Suddenly, he hears a noise behind him and opens fire at a shadow that flickers past. The enemy flees. The man places the device back into the case, but it suddenly activates earlier than expected. The man bursts into flames, writhing in agony on the floor. Suddenly, another man approaches and activates a device that transports the injured man into the future. In 1985, he wakes up in a clinic with bandages covering his face. Two representatives of the Temporal Bureau award the man a medal in recognition of his contributions to preventing mass crimes. They offer him the chance to retire and focus on recovery. However, the agent is troubled that the criminal is still at large. A dangerous terrorist known by the nickname the Fizzle Bomber is responsible for the deaths of numerous innocent people. Experts agree that he is truly insane. His next plan involves a massive explosion in New York in March 1875, which will take 11,000 lives. The agent asks for one last chance to catch the monster. Later, a doctor informs him that the tissues on his face have healed well, though he will no longer look the same as before the accident. He had risked too much, which took a toll on his mental state. His vocal cords were also damaged, meaning his voice will change. The agent is certain that even his own mother wouldn't recognize him now. After treatment, the agent receives his essential gear, including the violin case and weapons. He is sent to 1970s New York, where he works as a bartender. One evening, a customer arrives at the bar, places an order, and engages the agent in an honest conversation. They discuss the bomber, whose actions have instilled such fear that people are afraid to step outside. The visitor asks to hear a new joke, but the agent admits he isn't good at being funny. The visitor then confesses that he writes magazine articles under the pseudonym Single Mother. The agent reads his column and enjoys it, even though he is hard to impress. The visitor offers to tell him a story like no one has ever heard before. The agent takes up the challenge, but the visitor is distracted by the news about the Fizzle Bomber and is outraged by the foolish nickname, as though bombs don't cause terrible harm. He's killed 112 people, though some could say that a few of them deserved it. Nevertheless, the visitor begins his story about his life. It turns out that he was born in 1945 as a girl. She was an orphan, abandoned as a baby on the doorstep of an orphanage. A doctor examined the infant and found her completely healthy. She was named Jane and was surrounded by care. Jane was different from the others. She never got sick and was very curious. She was especially attracted to the world beyond the fence. She envied children with parents and often ran away to watch them. Jane was fearless and knew how to stand up for herself, which didn't sit well with the adults who were used to giving orders. The caretakers had to keep an eye on her to ensure she didn't get into trouble. She didn't understand what was wrong with her or why she had been abandoned. She knew she wasn't like everyone else. One day she saw adults loving each other and immediately decided that she wasn't like other girls. She vowed that all her children would have both a mother and a father, and so she focused on one thing, becoming strong. She learned to fight and often beat up other children. She was also the smartest in her class. She excelled in math and physics. However, no one wanted to adopt her because she was different. Jane stopped looking in the mirror and barely remembered what she looked like as a child. Shortly before graduation, Mr. Robertson arrived at the orphanage, announcing that he was looking for girls for a new organization preparing for space flights. Jane had always dreamed of becoming an astronaut, but girls weren't allowed, so she eagerly accepted the offer. It turned out that space corporations had realized that even in space, men needed women, so they sought out strong, mentally and physically robust girls capable of enduring the hardships of space travel and becoming loyal companions to astronauts. However, such girls were rare. Jane passed the interview despite notes in her file about behavioral issues. She confidently stated that she didn't want to be a tourist, as her knowledge and character would make her a full-fledged member of a space crew. She was given contact lenses, and now she saw the world clearly. She also passed the motion sickness test with ease. Many other girls couldn't handle the endurance test, but Jane impressed her mentors. She breezed through the psychological tests thanks to her talent and intelligence. In the end, she performed well and was the best among all the candidates. Everything was ruined by a simple fight. After she beat up a couple of her classmates, the doctors conducted a more thorough examination of her body. Robertson was shown the results and reluctantly agreed to disqualify Jane. However, he promised not to tell her and assured her that he would help her in the future. But Jane couldn't wait for his help, so she had to take a job as a nanny for a family. It was there that she read her first women's stories in magazines, which she loved to read between work and evening college classes, where she studied etiquette. hoping to prove to the Space Corporation that she had changed and was working on her manners. For the first time, something wasn't going her way, and then he appeared. One rainy evening, as Jane was returning from her course, she met a young man. As they talked, she noticed an extraordinary mental connection. They started a relationship. The man was handsome, rich, and treated her with kindness. He was different from the others, and all her rules about purity evaporated. She had fallen in love for the first time. They walked, laughed, had fun, and simply loved each other, until one day he vanished without a trace. One evening, Robertson came to her and revealed the truth about his organization's true purpose. It was to prevent crimes. And the Space Corporation was actually looking for people like her, without ties or family, but mentally sharp. However, it turned out that Jane was pregnant. After carrying the baby to term, she gave birth to a healthy girl. But during the birth, the doctors discovered that Jane had 2 sets of reproductive organs. Neither was fully developed, but the female organs allowed her to give birth. Due to complications, they had to remove them. Now, after a couple of surgeries, she would become a man. Jane considered this a cruel joke, but the doctor explained that it was her only option. She was young, her body would adapt, and everything would be fine. Shocked, Jane's time was consumed by caring for her baby girl, whom she also named Jane. However, a few days later, the newborn was stolen from the hospital by an unknown man. Jane reported it to the police and searched for her daughter everywhere, but in vain. The kidnapper was never found. Jane was forced to focus on her own problems. She spent 11 months in a clinic undergoing gender reassignment. Though her voice had become slightly deeper, she still couldn't accept her new self and couldn't look in the mirror, even though the nurses considered her handsome. It was easy for her to win their attention because she knew what women wanted, and now she learned that she could even have children. Jane didn't know what to do. She couldn't drive, and there was so much she didn't know about what men knew and did. So she went back to the Space Corporation to become an astronaut, even though her health records were clear. Realizing that she might become a subject for study, she left. Jane changed her name to John, bought a typewriter, and after studying a stack of romance magazines, began writing articles under the name Single Mother. After hearing the entire story, the agent suddenly admits that he knows certain details about John's life and offers to take him to meet the man who abandoned Jane so he can exact his revenge. John immediately seizes the opportunity, intending to kill his seducer. Together they descend into a basement where the agent reveals a violin case, which turns out to contain a real-time machine, transporting them to 1963. John struggles with the jump and is initially in disbelief about everything that is happening. The agent explains the work of the Bureau, gives John a wad of money, and clothes appropriate to the time. He tells him that jumps can only be made 50 years in either direction from the date the time machine was invented in 1981. John is offered the chance to become an agent if he can identify the man who seduced him, whom the agent believes is the bomber. He hands John a revolver, and John heads to the college where Jane studies. Rain begins to fall, and when Jane strikes up a conversation with him on the street, John realizes that he is the man who abandoned her. Meanwhile, the agent travels to the year when he tries to stop the bomber at the train station. A fight breaks out between them, and the bomber knocks the agent unconscious. However, when the agent regains consciousness, he hears gunshots and follows the sound to find his own self burning from the bomb that had gone off. He activates the time machine and sends his injured self into the future to receive help. The agent then travels to 1964. Locked away in a cheap apartment, he begins to spiral, not knowing how to catch the elusive, the Fizzle bomber. Suddenly, he remembers John's words about the inevitability of everything that happens. The agent recalls the doctor's warning that the psyche of someone who undergoes time jumps begins to break down. He starts recording on tape the tasks and goals of capturing the bomber. At the same time, Jane and John are sitting in a cafe discussing Jane's personality. She is amazed at how well this man seems to know her. The agent, meanwhile, meets with Robertson at the same hospital where Jane is giving birth to her child. He shows Robertson the timer he had taken from the bomber. The chief reminds him of the legal restrictions on time jumps and, more importantly, warns of the looming danger of psychosis and loss of identity. While Robertson disapproves of the illegal use of the time machine, he still doesn't object to the agent's pursuit of the bomber. The agent points out that Jane will endure a great deal of suffering because of him, but Robertson replies that it's all predestined. The agent is unique as the only one of his kind and is meant for this world. It's destiny. The agent then goes to the maternity ward and kidnaps baby Jane while adult Jane is growing closer to John. He takes the baby back to 1945 and leaves her on the orphanage's doorstep where Jane will grow up. After bidding farewell to John, the agent travels to 1963 to pick up John once more. He sees the pair sitting on a park bench. John notices him and, leaving Jane behind, angrily approaches the agent, accusing him of betrayal and insisting that he has no intention of abandoning Jane. The agent urges him to think and understand who is standing before him. Everything is happening in the correct order, as it must. Only Robertson can explain it fully. John agrees to be transported, and they both travel to the future. The agent tells him that he is now home and will go on to save millions of lives. However, John's body, unaccustomed to the jumps, suffers, and he is placed in a hospital. Robertson reminds the agent that, thanks to him, many lives will be saved. But the agent protests, pointing out that the Fizzle bomber has still not been caught. Without the Fizzle bomber, the Temporal Bureau wouldn't even exist. Robertson hands the agent the documents about the upcoming explosion and a timer that will deactivate once the agent reaches his destination. The agent heads into retirement in 1975 New York, where he deactivates his time machine, intending to retire for good. But he soon discovers that the deactivation didn't go as planned. He begins studying Robertson's documentation. Meanwhile, John listens to a cassette left for him by the agent and finally realizes that they are the same person. Robertson gives John the time machine, and John begins his work. The agent, on the other hand, buys a typewriter identical to the one he once had and begins writing down his story. As he reflects on everything he has learned, he realizes how to find the Fizzle bomber and heads to an old laundromat where he finally meets the aged bomber. However, during their encounter, it is revealed that the terrorist is his own future self. Using the principles of the Temporal Bureau, the Fizzle has been preventing the deaths of far more people in the future through his bombings, saving them from industrial disasters, terrorist attacks, and the like. By eliminating future killers, he sees his victims as mere collateral damage. The Fizzle bomber offers his younger self a chance to join forces, noting that the agent never told the Bureau that his decommissioned time machine wasn't actually disabled and was still functioning. Realizing who he will become, the agent kills the future version of himself. In his final moments, he experiences visions of John and Jane throughout various points in their lives, with a voiceover reflecting on the possibility of rewriting one's story despite the constraints of destiny. This is a captivating piece of fiction, with an original concept expressed through the beautiful language of cinema. While it may lack great depth, the paradoxes will certainly give you something to think about. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.